Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana, and you're watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another gun store vlog. Today I'm going to be addressing the question of, is the gun control debate in the United States about to fundamentally change? More specifically, when we're past all this crisis and panic that's going on, potentially 6 months to a year from now, or whenever that happens, we come around to the gun control debate topic again. Will that look substantially different than it did a year ago? I think it will, and if you want to know my reasons for why, stick around. That's coming up now. Okay, so this is a question that's sort of been rattling around in my mind for the better part of the past 2 to 4 weeks, and you guys have seen the other vlogs, and I think that this question is sort of a good addition to that. I think, given the circumstances and what's going on in the world right now, I think a lot of opinions and perspectives on things, not just firearm ownership, but a lot of things are going to definitely shift. And people are seeing a side of the world and a side of their daily lives that they had never seen before. So approaching this sort of question from a multi-pronged approach, I'm going to try and make this as concise as I can in this video, even though it's a very complicated question to address. The first thing is, let me get back to lifestyle. Here in the United States, or really anywhere in sort of the Western developed countries, we live very dull and very easy lives. I mean, compared to, if you look historically, compared to what humanity has had to endure in the past, at least in our lifetimes. I'm in my 30s, so I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot. People in their 60s, 70s, and 80s have seen some other hardships, such as World War II, the Vietnam era. So there were sort of life-altering events that have happened in people's lives, but this is most likely the biggest sort of change that we are seeing in most of our lives that we've ever seen before. Now, I'm going to move forward with this from the perspective of somebody in the United States, as I don't really have the same perspective of you if you're in Australia, for example. But I'm sure that a lot of Western countries are going to have sort of a similar motif here in terms of lifestyle and sort of expectations of safety and well-being. In the United States, we have the luxury of getting up every morning. Most of us have the luxury of going to work. We make a paycheck, we go home, we see our families. There aren't any widespread, until now, illnesses that have really affected anybody other than things that have been like cancer, heart disease, things like that, which by and large, doctors and physicians and medical professionals tell you that if you lead a safe life, if you make positive decisions in your life, you can have control. You can reduce the risk of those things happening. You don't smoke. You stay out of being in direct sunlight for too long. Don't text and drive. You might avoid a car accident. Wear your seatbelt. So we've gotten comfortable with our daily routine and the steps that we can take to live a productive and normal life without the risk of contracting a horrible disease or getting in a bad accident or anything like that, where we have to really be concerned with our lives or the lives of loved ones. Because of that, anytime there is an introduction of any type of threat or fear, of course, generally the outcome is an overreaction to the panic or the overreaction to the likelihood that that event could somehow impact our lives. This is something we routinely see with mass shootings. You have an event where 10, 15 people tragically are murdered in a single space. You have that event plastered all over the internet and the television, and then all of a sudden everybody, the United States, 350 million people, think that it's imminent, that it's going to happen to them or their kid in their workplace or their school, and then therefore we start making knee-jerk reactions to start trying to create policy to ban things. Okay, it's such and again, I really don't mean to demean anybody's lives, but if you take an event that kills 10 or 15 people and a population of 350 million, where since this video started, more than 15 people have died in car accidents in this country already. More than 15 people have died of smoking-related cancer. So again, not to demean those lives, but I'm just saying we're overhyping sort of the risk analysis of how those events might affect our lives. Because outside of those events, we are relatively safe and don't really have to worry about anything. Now, as Americans, most Americans, and I'm not speaking for all, we have a tendency to sort of not only expect it, but demand our government takes away all risk of danger or fear in our lives. Perfect example of this would be 9/11. So 9/11 here in the United States, just like this sort of pandemic that's happening worldwide. That was a black swan event. We had a single instance. Everybody knows what 9/11 was. I don't need to go into detail, but you had a single instance of an act of terrorism that led to a large loss of life in the 2,000 to 3,000 here in the United States. From that, we saw a very small fraction of what we're seeing now. What we're seeing now with all the panic buying and the shopping and the lines everywhere, we saw that here in the United States as well, but it lasted for maybe 1 week, maybe 2, and then things sort of retracted and people kind of got back to normal. You had a single event that hit, the event was over that day, and no other event occurred, and life sort of dissipated back to its sort of normalcy. From 9/11, we had about, this was about late October 2001, we have the passing of the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act passed with overwhelming support in Congress, and it basically, for lack of a better term, stripped us a lot of our personal freedoms for the betterment of being able to detect terrorism and to make our life safer against a 9/11 type event ever happening again. We gave the federal government the permission to go through our emails, our cell phone records, to be able to search homes, private businesses, apartments without any type of probable cause or warrant. And keep in mind, this is my cursory understanding of the Patriot Act. I'm not an attorney or a politician by any means, but it is widely debated and is not really contested that the fact is that we did give up a lot of our civil liberties in exchange for the perception that our government is going to somehow make us safer. Now, keep in mind, the United States rolled along just fine for decades, in sort of modern industrial America rolled along for such a long time without any massive acts of terrorism ever happening. In my perspective, in my opinion, did not need the Patriot Act to defend our country against terrorism. It was an event that, of course, the American people demanded. That's what we got, and that's what we're living with even today. Your cell phone data, your emails, your telephone calls are totally, it is up to the FBI if they want to screen, listen to, or do anything with that type of information. Now, here we are in 2020 and we have another black swan event, except the problem with this black swan event is it's not stopping. It's sort of unlimited and we don't know when the end of it is arriving. So again, 9/11, we have a single event. That event ended. It's over. We can figure out how to make sure it doesn't happen again and we can go on with life. In 2020, we have an event that's very similar, but the event has hit and it's not stopping. Imagine if we were back at 9/11, 2,000 or 3,000 people died, which we're seeing that happen about every day worldwide. So imagine a 9/11 happening, and then a 9/11 happening, then a 9/11 happening day after day after day, and that's sort of the type of situation that we're in now. However, I think the outcome here, because of that sort of uncertain progression of things that are happening, I think it's starting to create a different perspective or different set of perceptions from the American people as they look at their government. So after 9/11, people could look at that single instance, look at their government and say, make me safer. Now, people are every day looking at their government. What can you do to make us safer? What can you do to make us safer? And the problem is the government cannot. And people demand to be able to be safe. They want to be protected. They want to feel like they have control over what they have and the safety of their family. And they're starting to see that in an event like this, it's starting to become impossible for the government to be able to offer solution. So it's making people see that we're not as safe as we thought we were, and we can't always depend on the government for our own personal safety. It's overwhelmingly obvious that that's the case because gun stores like mine are being flooded and hit up constantly by new gun owners and new gun buyers who need those firearms because they're losing trust in the fact that the police department can't be there to save them. The federal government can't be there to save them. They have to save themselves. And sort of the waking up moment to that, I think is occurring now, and I think it's pretty obvious that that's happening. So instead of people wanting to give away their abilities to protect themselves or to protect their privacy to the government can, in exchange, make us feel safe instantly, which in my opinion was what the Patriot Act was. The difference here is if we can't give things to the government like gun ownership because then the government's not there to protect us and I can't protect myself. In this sort of symbiotic relationship that we once thought we had, we can't give things to the government because right now we cannot get things in exchange. Now, I think as time goes on and this gets worse, and I think it will, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, we're going to see more people sort of see their reality for what it is. That, again, There are now vulnerabilities in people's lives. They have now seen, lived, and experienced it, to where they now know that having things like the ability to protect yourself is going to be vital and more important. The gun control debate back in the 50s and 60s was so much different than it is today, in my opinion, because people who were around at that time, people living in those times, had seen issues. A lot of those people had seen the Great Depression. A lot of those people had experienced World War II, where they saw that there was big periods of times where the government was absent and they had to be available to defend and protect themselves. I think, again, this is the great, for millennials, people in my generation, people younger, people a little bit older who have not experienced that. I think this is the catalytic event in people's lives that are going to at least shed a little bit of light on the importance of self-preservation and taking matters into your own hand. Okay, now moving on to sort of the second prong of this sort of debate would be, of course, to argue that now there is a tremendous amount of new firearm owners in the marketplace. Okay, that goes without saying that the more people who buy something, it's going to create a higher likelihood that those people are going to be in favor of private firearm ownership the next time the debate sparks up. That goes without saying, but I think it's important to sort of analyze and think of the reasons why. Why is that going to happen? And I've sort of internalized this question, and it really sort of applies to my own personal experience with firearms, which I'll share with you guys here. So I actually come from a family that was not too friendly to firearms as I was growing up. There's a lot of people in my family who have been in my past anti-gun. Some of them still are, some of them still not, and that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. In my personal household, my mom had unfortunately seen a lot of things growing up, a lot of people being hurt by firearms, whether it was friends being shot or people killing themselves. So her experience, again, we can only build our perception on things based off of our experiences. Her experiences were pretty negative. My dad, when he grew up, of course, we're from actually Oklahoma. So, when he was growing up in rural Oklahoma, it was a very normal part of his life to have rifles and shotguns, and, they would go hunting and things. He was never really sort of into the huge part of the firearm culture. Guns were always around in his life growing up. He was in the Boy Scouts, and they would take their rifles and stuff to school, and then after school go to Boy Scouts and do 22 target training and things like that. So they were always sort of around, but he never really saw, as he grew up, he never really kept his interest in firearms. So when he and my mother got married, guns just weren't in the house. It was never a debate or an issue between them. And sort of my perspective growing up was that guns are bad and guns are dangerous. Now, I never really took a political stance on guns. I did not really care one way or the other. Guns were never really talked about in my house, growing up as a kid. So when I was, in high school and then into college, I still did not own any guns. And to be perfectly honest, taking a anti-gun political stance was the easy thing to do. And I'll sort of explain why. When a mass shooting happens and you're surrounded with people in high school or college and they're talking about how awful firearms are and how, they kill people. When you don't have a dog in the fight and you don't have guns and you really don't care, and at the time I didn't see myself owning guns, I didn't see the reason, that I would want to. It's the easier thing to do to just say, yeah, I agree with you, because you're avoiding conflict. Not only are you avoiding conflict, but you're garnering favor with the people with who you're talking to, because obviously they have a political opinion on that. You have no reason to refute their political opinion, so you just agree. And that was sort of my perspective to firearm ownership until I had that one event where I had actually my best friend, still is my best friend today, took me, and this was sort of towards the tail end of college, took me to a gun range. He had a bunch of firearms, and we were hanging around his house one day, and he said, hey, do you want to go to the range and shoot these guns? And I said, sure, that sounds fine. One trip to the range, my perception on firearm ownership 100% changed. I learned a couple things. Most importantly, I had an amazing time. It was incredible fun. In fact, like 2 weeks after that, I went and bought my first gun because I had so much fun and I wanted to keep going back and shooting. The other thing I learned very quickly is that I had complete and total control over the firearms. And once I took that opportunity to go and experience that, my whole perception on firearms as being this sort of thing you don't know and don't understand to something I have complete and total control over. Therefore, everybody else who uses one, even for bad reasons, has control over it. And it's their decision in that control versus my decision and my control of the firearm that creates a different outcome. It's like you see those guys get in those snake pits with those cobras, and they just kind of fling them around and throw them around. They're totally oblivious and don't care to the fact that they're there. Whereas you or I, who are not trained in snake handling, would be like, we see a snake and we run instantly. It's just, we see the snake. It's like a primordial instinct. You see that colorful poisonous snake, you stay away from it. But those snake handlers have gotten used to the fact that they can control what they're doing. The fear for them completely goes away. And that's exactly, for me, it wasn't really a fear. It was just a sort of an uncertainty. And that was at the tail end of college. And then here I am a short amount of time later owning a gun store, talking to, 50,000 of you guys about gun ownership. So it's just interesting how a single event like that can really change drastically, in my case, somebody's opinion on a topic. The point I'm trying to make in this sort of long story is now we have a huge amount of people that are going through that similar experience, in my opinion. They did not have firearms, so when they were with their friends or their family, or the news came on and we have this next horrific shooting, the easy thing to do is to say, I want guns banned, I don't like them, because they did not own them, they never saw a reason for owning them, but that has now changed. When the debates spark up at their dinner tables with their friends and their families, they can no longer take the easy approach of saying, I agree with you, guns should be banned, because they now have a gun in their closet. They can't say that. People will stand up for their decision for why they did something before they allow themselves to be called a hypocrite. So once they have that firearm, they can't really take the position to say, yeah, guns should be banned, guns should be outlawed, because their family member or friend are going to say, well, then why do you have a gun? Those people now have to take a pro-gun stance, or they're being hypocritical and disingenuous. Now, along with that comes how easy it is to call for the banning or dismissal of something when you have no interest in that item. And what I mean by that is you always heard the argument, if we could save just one life, isn't it worth banning firearms? Well, that's really easy to say when you have no interest in firearms, because you can't justify one life for something you have no interest or any perceived value in. It's easy to say, let's ban cars that can go over 40 miles an hour when you have no interest in owning a car that goes over 40 miles an hour. Or saying, let's ban smoking because smoking leads to lung cancer. That's easy for you to say when you don't smoke. Or let's ban alcohol because alcohol leads to drunk driving, which kills people. It's easy to say when you don't have an interest in drinking. Let's ban religion because religion has led to the death of many people. That's easy for you to say because you don't believe in God. So it's incredibly easy to call for the banning of something where even if it takes one life, that one life is not acceptable to you because you see no benefit for that one life. Now, when you have a bunch of people who are now becoming gun owners, that need or that desire to have the firearm in the house now starts to take away the ease by which it is to call for the banning of something, because now you see perceived value in the thing in which you want to ban. So while I think it's going to definitely shape a lot of perspective and a lot of people in the middle ground, people who are either on the fence or just slightly anti-gun, I think all those people, whether they bought a gun or not, I think that their perceptions are going to be changed by what's happening, and they're going to kind of add on to the pro-gun debate side of the argument. Now, people who are staunchly anti-gun, so what I was talking about first was the people, and this was really the camp I was in, it was the people who didn't really care one way or the other. It was just easier to avoid, debate with people, to just agree with what they were saying because you didn't care. I was, the minute I went to a range and wanted to be a gun owner, I now cared, and I cared in favor of gun ownership because now I had a reason to. As selfish and as weird as that might be, we really have to create our own personal interests and things before we can really stand up and be proud of demonstrating or standing behind that cause. That's when that personal interest for me was created. That's when my main interest in firearm ownership, and therefore the protection and freedom of firearm ownership, sort of was spawned in me. And I think we're having those moments happening with millions and millions of Americans right now. Well, guys, those are my thoughts on this topic. If you disagree, please feel free to leave your dissent down in the comment section. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and takeaways on this, or if you expand upon my ideas, it might be interesting to sort of have that conversation and how we think that this is going to be shaped. Again, any questions, comment section. If you enjoyed, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel so you can see more content. Guys, the used guns of the week videos are going to start ramping back up as I get my store reopened. I'm trying really hard to get inventory back in here, but the shipping times, again, like I've mentioned, are behind about 2 weeks. So I'm just now starting to get inventory orders that I placed right before I closed. So hopefully I get this place restocked, get my doors open, and I become available for you guys. We get those used guns of the week videos back up, gun comparisons, and kind of we get a little bit back to normal, hopefully. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, guys, I will leave you there. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.